The strangest thing about missing people is how quickly the world learns to live without them. At first, everyone cares. Search teams flood the streets, reporters crowd the sidewalks, faces appear on television screens and telephone poles. Then the months pass. Then the years. And eventually, the silence becomes permanent. 6 years ago, my neighbor's 15-year-old son vanished without a trace. One afternoon he was riding his bike through the neighborhood. By sunset, he was gone. Police searched the woods behind our subdivision for weeks. Volunteers covered every trail, every drainage ditch, every abandoned building within miles. Nothing. No witnesses. No suspects. No body. After enough time passed, most people quietly accepted that the boy would never come home. His parents never did. I could see it every time I looked at them. The grief had settled into their faces like something physical. His mother barely left the house anymore. His father, Richard, became a nervous shell of the man he used to be. He jumped at sudden noises, avoided eye contact, always looked exhausted. Back then, I assumed that was what years of heartbreak did to a person. Now I'm not so sure. Last Thursday started like any other day. I was dragging my garbage bins toward the curb when Richard appeared beside me. The man looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, mud on his boots, hands trembling slightly. "Can I borrow your shovel?" he asked. I didn't think twice. He was my neighbor. I handed it over. He thanked me and disappeared toward his backyard. That should have been the end of it. But later that afternoon, I happened to glance out of an upstairs window overlooking the neighboring yards. And that's when I saw him. Digging. Not a small hole. A massive one. Deep enough that he periodically disappeared inside it. The sight immediately felt wrong. Richard wasn't planting anything. He wasn't landscaping. He was digging with the kind of urgency people have when they're looking for something. Or hiding it. For nearly 40 minutes, I watched him work. Sweat soaked through his shirt. Dirt flew across the lawn. And every few minutes he'd stop and glance around the neighborhood. Checking windows. Checking fences. Checking rooftops. Making sure nobody was watching. I finally grabbed my spare shovel and walked over. The moment he saw me approaching, his entire expression changed. Panic. Pure panic. He dropped the shovel I'd loaned him and rushed toward me. "Don't." His voice came out sharper than I expected. "I was just offering to help," I said. "No." His eyes flicked toward the hole. Then back to me. For a second I thought he was afraid. Not of me. Of what I might see. Then he pointed toward the gate. "Please leave." The words sounded less like a request, and more like a warning. That night, long after midnight, I woke to a metallic sound outside. Clang, clang, clang. A shovel striking dirt. I walked to the window. The hole was gone, but Richard was still outside, digging in the exact same spot. And this time, he wasn't alone. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. The backyard was almost completely swallowed by darkness. Only a weak strip of moonlight cut across the grass. But there was definitely someone standing beside Richard. A second figure. Motionless. Watching. I leaned closer to the glass. The figure never moved. Not once. Meanwhile, Richard kept digging. Clang. 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 The sound echoed through the sleeping neighborhood. Then suddenly, the porch light flicked on. The second figure vanished. Just gone. As if it had never been there. Richard immediately dropped the shovel and hurried inside his house. The backyard became silent. I should have gone back to bed. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. 5 minutes passed. No lights came back on. No doors opened. Nothing. I quietly slipped outside. The cold night air hit me immediately. Every instinct told me to turn around. I ignored it. Crossing my yard, I crept toward the fence separating our properties. The hole was still there. Deeper than before. Much deeper. I climbed over. The grass felt damp beneath my feet. The entire backyard smelled strangely earthy, like freshly disturbed soil after heavy rain. As I approached the pit, my pulse began to race. The darkness inside seemed unnaturally thick. I crouched at the edge and looked down. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed it. Something black, partially buried beneath loose dirt. A thick plastic sheet. Or maybe a garbage bag. Only a corner of it was visible. But it was enough. My stomach dropped. Suddenly every memory came rushing back. The missing boy. The years without answers. Richard's panic when I approached. The secret of digging. The nervous glances. The hole. Everything pointed toward the same horrifying possibility. I looked back toward the house. The back door remained closed. No lights. No movement. Part of me wanted to uncover whatever was down there. Just enough to know. Just enough to confirm my suspicions. My hands were already reaching toward the edge of the pit when a sound stopped me cold. A floorboard creaked inside the house. I froze. Another creak. Closer. Someone was moving. I backed away immediately. One step. Then another. Then I turned and hurried toward the fence. The second my feet touched my own yard, a floodlight exploded across Richard's backyard. Brilliant white light. I ducked behind the fence. Heart hammering. A few seconds later, I heard the back door open. Slowly. Carefully. Then footsteps. Richard wasn't checking the hole. He wasn't looking around his property. He was staring directly toward my house. Toward my windows. Toward me. I stayed hidden until the light finally switched off. The next morning, the hole had completely disappeared. Fresh grass seed covered the area. As if nothing had ever happened. As if the earth had never been disturbed. But something else caught my attention. Richard's SUV was gone. And so was the shovel I had loaned him. For the next 3 days, he never left his house. Never answered his door. Never stepped outside. Then on the 4th day, I looked out my bedroom window and nearly fell backward. Richard was standing in an upstairs room. Perfectly still. Looking directly into my house. Not at the window. At me. And when our eyes met, he slowly raised a finger to his lips, telling me to stay quiet. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard standing in that window. Still. Silent. That finger pressed against his lips, telling me not to speak. By morning, my nerves were shot. I finally decided I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called the police. Not because I had proof, because I couldn't ignore the feeling that something terrible was hidden behind that fence. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They listened patiently as I explained everything. The missing boy. The hole. The late night digging. The black plastic buried underground. Richard watching my house. Even as I spoke, I felt ridiculous. It sounded like paranoia. A chain of assumptions. Yet the officers agreed to take a look. The moment they stepped into Richard's backyard, something felt wrong. The fresh patch of earth stood out immediately. The grass seed hadn't settled. The soil was loose. Recently disturbed. One officer pushed a shovel into the ground. Then another. Within minutes, both men stopped digging. One of them stared into the hole. The color drained from his face. He immediately called for backup. My stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment. The truth was finally coming out. Police vehicles flooded the street within an hour. Crime scene tape appeared. Forensic teams arrived. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks. Everyone watched. Everyone whispered. But they weren't pulling out human remains. They weren't uncovering a body. They were uncovering something else. A large metal hatch. Buried several feet underground. Nobody knew what it was. Not even Richard. At least, that's what he claimed. Police questioned him for hours. According to investigators, the hatch led into an old storm shelter built decades before the neighborhood existed. A forgotten structure hidden beneath the property. When officers finally forced it open, they found evidence that someone had been living inside. Recently. Food wrappers. Bottled water. Blankets. Batteries. A radio. And dozens of newspaper clippings. Every single clipping was about one person. Richard's missing son. The entire room was covered with them. Floor to ceiling. As if whoever stayed there had become obsessed. Then came the discovery that shook everyone. The shelter had a second exit. A narrow tunnel stretching into nearby woods. And inside that tunnel, investigators found fresh footprints. Very fresh. Someone had been there only days earlier. Maybe hours. The search expanded for miles. News crews returned. The neighborhood exploded with rumors. But they never found the person living underground. Not then. Not ever. The case remains unsolved. Richard moved away shortly afterward. His wife left months later. The house sat empty for years. Most people eventually forgot about it. I wish I could. Because there's one detail I never told the police. The night before I called them, I looked out my bedroom window around 3 in the morning. And standing beside Richard in his backyard was the same figure I had seen before. The one I thought disappeared. The figure wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a trespasser. It wasn't some drifter hiding underground. For one brief second, illuminated by moonlight, I saw its face. It looked exactly like the missing boy, only older, and he was staring directly at me, smiling, as if he'd never been missing at all. The police report was filed almost 10 years later, not because anyone had finally been hurt, not because someone had disappeared, but because two names from my childhood suddenly appeared in a local news article. The moment I saw their faces, I felt 14 years old again, and remembered the summer I became afraid to sleep near a window. Back then, my family was preparing to move away from a quiet neighborhood we'd lived in for most of my life. The house next door had always felt strange. Not haunted, not abandoned, just wrong. A father lived there with his two sons, Dylan and Mason. Despite growing up side by side for years, my younger brother and I barely knew them. Nobody did. The boys rarely came outside, rarely spoke to neighbors, and whenever I saw them, they seemed to be watching people more than interacting with them. Then, a few weeks before our move, everything changed. My brother and I were playing basketball in the driveway when Mason suddenly appeared. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had with him. The first thing he asked was whether it was true that we were moving. When I said yes, he seemed disappointed, almost nervous. Then he invited us to hang out the following afternoon near the river beyond the woods. My little brother immediately agreed. I wasn't excited about it, but curiosity got the better of me. The next day, just before sunset, the brothers showed up at our front door. The sight of them was unsettling. Both wore camouflage jackets despite the warm weather. One carried a large duffel bag over his shoulder. Neither smiled. Neither made small talk. The entire walk to the woods felt uncomfortable. The deeper we went beneath the trees, the quieter they became. Eventually we reached the riverbank. The woods around us were completely empty. No trails, no houses, no people, just moving water and endless trees. Mason dropped the duffel bag onto the ground. The metallic clanking sound that came from inside instantly caught my attention. Then he unzipped it. At first, I thought they were BB guns, toy rifles, something harmless. But when Dylan pulled one out and worked the slide back, I heard a sound that immediately made my stomach tighten. A real gun. Not one. Several. Before I could even react, he raised one toward the opposite side of the river and fired. The gunshot exploded through the woods. Birds scattered from the trees. My brother jumped. I froze. The brothers started laughing. And for the first time, I noticed something strange in their expressions. Not excitement. Not rebellion. Enjoyment. As if frightening people was the entire point. I grabbed my brother's arm. We're leaving. The laughter stopped immediately. Neither of them tried to stop us. They just stood there, watching. As we walked away, I looked back one last time. Both brothers were staring after us from the riverbank, completely motionless. And even from that distance, I could tell they weren't happy we were leaving. That night, I woke up to a cold breeze touching my face. My bedroom window was wide open, and someone was standing inside my room. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I was still half asleep, staring at the open window, trying to understand why freezing air was pouring into my room. Then I felt it. Something cold and hard pressing against the back of my neck. Not a hand. Metal. My entire body locked up. A voice whispered from directly behind me. "Don't make a sound." I recognized it instantly. Mason. My heart felt like it stopped beating. The room was completely dark except for a faint glow from the streetlights outside. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was there, standing only inches away, holding something against my head. A gun. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream for my parents. I wanted to run. Instead, I sat perfectly still. The whisper came again. "If you tell anybody what you saw today." A pause. Then a quiet laugh. "We'll come back. Not I'll come back. We." My stomach twisted. He was talking about his brother too. "You understand?" I barely managed to nod. The metal pressed harder against my head. "Good." A few seconds later, I heard movement. A shoe scraping the floor. The creak of my window frame. Then silence. By the time I gathered enough courage to move, he was gone. Completely gone. The next morning, I told nobody. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not a single person. Part of me thought nobody would believe me. The other part was terrified they might. After that night, things became worse. Much worse. I started noticing the brothers everywhere. Not during the day, At night. Always at night. Sometimes I'd wake up and see a silhouette standing at one of their upstairs windows, watching our house, watching my room. Other nights, my younger brother would quietly tell me he thought someone had been outside his window. Neither of us wanted to admit who we thought it was. But we both knew, the closer our moving date got, the stranger their behavior became. It felt like they were angry we were leaving, as if we knew something we weren't supposed to know. One night, I looked outside around midnight and saw both brothers standing motionless in their front yard. No bikes, no phones, no conversation, just staring at our house. The sight unsettled me so much that I immediately closed the curtains. A few days later, something happened that convinced me they were capable of anything. At exactly 1:07 a.m., a rock slammed against my bedroom window. The impact jolted me awake. I rushed toward the glass. Outside, near the street, stood the two brothers, waiting, watching, and one of them was holding something in his hands. Something that caught the moonlight. Something metallic. Then he slowly raised it, and pointed it directly at my window. For one horrifying second, I thought he was about to pull the trigger. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The second I saw the gun pointed toward my window, I dropped to the floor. Instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just dove beside my bed and covered my head. For a moment, I was certain I was about to hear a gunshot. My breathing became shallow. My entire body trembled. Then, laughter. Loud laughter. The kind that instantly tells you something is wrong with the people making it. I slowly lifted my head. Outside, the two brothers were doubled over, laughing hysterically. One of them shouted an insult toward the house. Then they disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And neither did my little brother. The next morning, I found out he had seen them too. It wasn't just me anymore. Whatever game they were playing had become focused on both of us. The final week before our move felt endless. Every night brought something new. Footsteps outside windows. Rocks hitting siding. Shadows moving through our backyard after midnight. Once, my brother woke up crying because he saw someone standing outside his bedroom window. Just standing there, watching him sleep. When I looked outside, whoever it was had already vanished. But I already knew who it had been. The strange part wasn't the threats. It was how careful they were. The brothers never got caught. Never left evidence. Never stayed long enough for our parents to notice. It was as if they understood exactly how far they could go without exposing themselves. Then moving day finally arrived. I remember standing in the driveway while the last boxes were loaded into the truck. For the first time in months, I felt relief. We were leaving. It was over. Then I looked toward the neighboring house. Both brothers were standing in an upstairs window, watching. Neither waved. Neither smiled. They simply stared as our family drove away. I never saw them again. Years passed. Life moved on. I rarely thought about that neighborhood. Rarely thought about those boys. Until one morning, I was drinking coffee before work when a local news article appeared on my phone. The headline mentioned two brothers arrested after a violent incident several towns away. I clicked it, and immediately recognized their faces. Older, but unmistakable. The article described years of escalating criminal behavior, threats, weapons charges, and assaults. As I stared at the screen, one realization hit me harder than anything else. Those boys hadn't become dangerous adults. They had already been dangerous when they were kids. My brother and I were just lucky enough to leave before their obsession with us turned into something worse. Sometimes I still think about that night. The open window, the cold air, the whisper behind my head, and the fact that a stranger breaking into my room wasn't the part that scares me most. What scares me most is this: he wasn't a stranger. He was the boy living next door. And for months afterward, nobody had any idea what he was capable of. The first thing the police officer asked was simple. "Are you absolutely sure she was inside your house?" I didn't answer right away. Because even after seeing her with my own eyes, part of me still couldn't believe it. The woman lived next door, and she had been standing beside my bed at 3 in the morning. 2 weeks earlier, I thought my biggest problem was living in a terrible neighborhood. Fresh out of college, broke, and trying to survive on my own, I'd bought the cheapest house I could find. The street wasn't exactly welcoming. One side blasted music until sunrise. The other side was worse. Much worse. 2 women lived there. An older woman in her 60s who always looked angry, and a younger woman who seemed deeply unstable. Almost every day I'd see episodes unfold in their front yard. The younger woman would rock back and forth violently, screaming at things nobody else could see. Sometimes she'd point directly at me, muttering words I couldn't hear. The older woman would grab her arms and drag her back inside. It was disturbing enough that I'd often retreat indoors just to avoid watching. Then one Thursday night, things escalated. I had work early the next morning. Around midnight, the screaming next door became unbearable. Objects crashing, doors slamming, the younger woman shrieking so loudly that it echoed through the neighborhood. After nearly an hour, I finally lost my patience. I walked next door and knocked. Hard. The older woman answered immediately. "What do you want?" No greeting. No smile. Nothing. I politely asked if they could keep the noise down. For a few seconds she simply stared at me. Then the younger woman suddenly appeared behind her. Her eyes locked onto mine. "How dare you?" The words exploded from her mouth. Again. And again. And again. The older woman struggled to hold her back before slamming the door directly in my face. I stood there stunned. Then I returned home. Oddly enough, the house next door went silent almost immediately. For the first time all night, I was able to sleep. Or at least I tried. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke up. No reason. No nightmare. Just a strange feeling. I listened carefully. The house was quiet. A few minutes later, I fell asleep again. Then something woke me a second time. A sound. Very soft. Very close. Breathing. I sat upright. The room was pitch black. For several seconds, I couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. Then I noticed it. A dark shape. At the side of my bed. Completely motionless. Watching me. My hand found my phone. The flashlight clicked on, and the face illuminated by the beam nearly stopped my heart. It was the younger woman from next door, crouched beside my bed, smiling. The second the light hit her eyes, she opened her mouth and screamed, and then she lunged toward me. The scream didn't sound human. It was high-pitched, violent, and so loud that it seemed to vibrate through the walls. I stumbled backward off the bed. My phone flew from my hand and skidded across the floor. For a split second, the flashlight beam spun around the room, and in that spinning light, I caught another glimpse of her face. Wide eyes. A twisted grin. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then she rushed toward me. I ran. Pure instinct. Nothing else. I bolted for the bedroom door, nearly slipping on the hardwood floor. Behind me, I could hear her feet slapping against the ground. Fast. Too fast. I yanked the door open and sprinted into the hallway. The house suddenly felt enormous. Every step echoed. Every shadow seemed alive. Halfway down the hall, I risked a glance behind me. She was still there, emerging from my bedroom, still screaming, still chasing me. I practically threw myself down the staircase. My shoulder slammed into the wall. Pain shot through my arm. I barely noticed. The only thing that mattered was getting away from her. I reached the first floor and locked the door leading to the upstairs hallway. A second later, she hit it. Bang. The entire frame shook. Bang. Another impact. Then screaming. Endless screaming. Words mixed with gibberish. Fragments of sentences. None of it made sense. I backed away and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it while dialing emergency services. The operator answered. I could barely get the words out. "There's someone in my house," the pounding continued. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. Those next few minutes felt like hours. The woman never stopped. Sometimes she'd pound on the door. Sometimes she'd laugh. Sometimes she'd whisper things I couldn't understand through the wood. Each sound was somehow worse than the last. Then, suddenly, silence. Complete silence. The absence of noise felt even more terrifying. I stared at the door, waiting, listening, wondering if she'd somehow found another way downstairs. Then red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. Police. I nearly collapsed from relief. Officers entered the house moments later. They rushed upstairs. And within seconds, I heard shouting. The woman had been found sitting quietly in my bedroom. As if nothing had happened. As if she belonged there. But what happened next disturbed me even more. Because when police brought her outside, the older woman from next door was already standing in my yard. Waiting, not surprised. Not confused. Waiting. and the expression on her face told me something was very wrong, because she wasn't looking at the woman being arrested. She was staring directly at me, with pure hatred. And when one of the officers asked whether I wanted to press charges, that stare only became darker, as if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. The officer repeated the question, "Do you want to press charges?" I looked from him to the older woman. She hadn't blinked once. The porch lights illuminated her face just enough for me to see the anger burning behind her eyes. Not frustration, not embarrassment, hatred. The kind that feels personal, as though I'd done something unforgivable. For a moment, nobody spoke. The younger woman sat handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, quietly rocking back and forth, completely different from the screaming person who had chased me through my house only minutes earlier. It was unsettling, like watching two different people occupy the same body. "I don't know," I finally said. The truth was, I just wanted the night to end. The officer explained that entering someone's home was a serious crime, especially considering the circumstances. But as he spoke, I couldn't stop looking at the older woman. Something about her expression bothered me. She didn't seem concerned. She didn't seem surprised. If anything, she seemed angry that the situation had failed. Failed. The thought appeared in my mind before I could stop it. Failed at what? In the end, I declined to press charges. I told myself it was because of the younger woman's condition. That seemed like the reasonable thing to do. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I wanted those eyes off me. The officer nodded and finished his report. The older woman never said thank you, never apologized, never acknowledged what had happened. She simply continued staring. Then the police vehicle drove away with the younger woman inside. The older woman remained standing in her yard long after the flashing lights disappeared, watching my house, watching me. 5 minutes later, she got into an old sedan and drove away without turning on the radio or headlights until she reached the end of the street. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And over the following days, things became even stranger. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel someone watching. The older woman rarely left her porch, but whenever I looked in her direction, she was already looking at me. No wave, no smile, just that same expression. Cold, resentful, waiting. A week later, I checked my security camera footage, mostly for peace of mind. I wish I hadn't. At 2:43 a.m., the night before the break-in, the footage showed the older woman standing beside my house. Not knocking, not moving, just standing there, for nearly 20 minutes. Then she walked back home. The younger woman entered my house less than an hour later. I never showed the footage to anyone. Maybe I should have, because the most disturbing part happened yesterday. I was taking out the trash when I glanced toward their property. The older woman was sitting on her porch, watching me. Nothing unusual there. Then the front door behind her slowly opened. The younger woman stepped outside. She looked directly at me and smiled. The same smile I saw beside my bed at 3 in the morning. The smile of someone who remembered exactly what happened. And standing behind her, the older woman smiled too. Neither of them looked away. Not until I went back inside and locked the door. I've started looking for a new place to live. Because some neighbors are annoying. Some are strange. And some make you wonder whether the worst night of your life was only the beginning.